They laughed when I placed my handmade quilt on the wedding gift table. "Is that cloth?" one of them whispered, barely hiding her smirk behind a crystal flute of champagne. "Oh, honey, bless her heart. She must have gotten lost on the way to a baby shower." I stood there in my department store dress, clutching my purse with both hands like a schoolgirl in church, pretending I didn't hear them. But I did, every word, every sideways glance, every breathless giggle at my so-called gift. They didn't know who I was. Or rather, they thought they did. "My name is Callie. I'm the older sister, the one who stayed in the small town, taught 3rd grade, and married a man who wore flannel shirts and muddy boots." Meanwhile, my sister Brielle soared into high society on the wings of her wealthy fiancé, and somewhere along the way, I guess I became an afterthought just background to her spotlight. Today was her wedding day. A grand, blindingly white affair at the exclusive Holston estate, where every detail screamed money. The napkins were monogrammed. The floral arrangements looked like they cost more than my car, and the guest list, hand-picked for clout. And then there was me with my quilt. It wasn't even flashy, just white wrapping paper tied with a pale blue ribbon I'd saved from my grandmother's sewing box. Inside was something I'd spent 6 weeks stitching by hand patches of our childhood memories, the curtains from our shared bedroom, a square from Brielle's prom dress, a scrap from the old family picnic blanket. Every piece told a story, every stitch was love. But none of that mattered to them. By the time I found my tableway in the back corner with distant cousins and people, I didn't know I could feel the judgment clinging to me like perfume. Brielle's new in-laws didn't even try to mask it. Her mother-in-law, a woman wearing diamonds that glinted like knives, actually said, "Callie, was it? We've heard very little about you." Translation: "You're not worth discussing." I nodded politely, offered a compliment, then quietly took my seat. I had no armor left. I'd walked into a battlefield dressed in sincerity, and I was bleeding. The worst part? Brielle saw it happen. She watched one of her bridesmaids lift my quilt off the table, shake it gently like it might bite, and then giggle, "Did someone bring their laundry?" I saw my sister hesitate. Her eyes met mine. I waited for her to say anything. She didn't. Instead, she laughed. Politely, nervously, but she laughed. And that hurt more than anything. I stepped away during cocktail hour, found a quiet window, and just stared out over the estate lawn. The sky was painted in pinks and oranges, like the ones we used to watch from the roof of our childhood home. I wondered if she remembered. I doubted it. Then my phone buzzed. "Landing now. Be there in 30. It was from my husband, Evan. Just reading his name steadied my breath. Evan had been overseas for work and wasn't supposed to make it, but somehow he found a way. That was Evan quiet, calm, and always there when it counted. He never wore anything flashy, and most people underestimated him because he looked like a farm boy on casual Friday. But there was more to Evan than anyone at this wedding could imagine. And they were about to find out. As I returned to the reception hall, a new humiliation was unfolding. I caught sight of the wedding planner moving things around on the gift table with Brielle's mother-in-law beside her. "This one," she said, pointing at my quilt without a second's pause. "It's unsightly. Let's move it behind the larger boxes. We don't want it in the photos." I froze. Unsightly. Like I was clutter. Like Love Real, Quiet Love was offensive to their curated aesthetic. I wanted to disappear, to grab my quilt and run, to escape the sting of being less than, of being dismissed, not just by strangers in pearls and designer heels but by my own sister. My phone buzzed again. "I'm here." 2 simple words, but they felt like thunder. I turned toward the entrance, and there he was, Evan. But not the Evan I saw at breakfast that morning in jeans and a hoodie. This Evan wore a tailored suit that fit him like second skin, his usually tousled hair neatly styled. His expression was unreadable, calm like still water but with an edge that said, "Not today." Heads turned as he walked through the hall. Conversations paused. The same women who had rolled their eyes at me earlier were now whispering, "Who is that?" Evan came straight to me, kissed me on the cheek, and said, "Sorry I'm late, sweetheart." The world around me slowed. He turned to survey the room, then leaned close and whispered, "I heard what happened." I nodded, shame flooding back. "It's fine." "No, it's not," he said. "Would you mind if I said something after the toasts?" I blinked. "Why?" "Because I think it's time they learn what a real gift looks like." And just like that, the ground shifted beneath me. Not with rage, not with vengeance, but with a quiet kind of power. A storm that doesn't shout, it just arrives completely, and without asking permission. I didn't know what Evan was planning. He just slipped into the crowd, blending in like he always did, calm, quiet, unnoticed if you didn't know to look. But people were starting to notice. There was something about the way he carried himself, shoulders relaxed, gaze steady, every movement efficient but unhurried. A few men leaned closer to whisper. A woman near the bar tilted her head. Even the wedding planner paused mid-step, unsure whether to say hello or step aside. He didn't need a spotlight. The room adjusted to him on its own. And yet, Evan didn't rush anything. He didn't confront anyone. He didn't call out the bridesmaids who'd mocked my quilt, or the mother-in-law who'd buried it behind a stack of La Creuset boxes. Instead, he simply found our table, yes. The one in the back and sat beside me like it was the best seat in the house. "I missed you," he said quietly. I smiled, my throat tight. "You really didn't have to come." "I did," he replied, "because they need to remember who you are, and maybe who I am too." His words lingered, not in a dramatic way, but like a truth you didn't want to face. The speeches began not long after. First the best man charming, funny, well-rehearsed. Then the maid of honor, who turned her toast into a slideshow of Brielle's designer milestones and exotic vacations. I watched my sister soak it all, in her eyes shining, her posture perfect, her new in-laws glowing with pride. And yet, every time her gaze drifted toward our table, something flickered in her expression. Maybe a little discomfort. Maybe guilt. Then Evan stood up. No announcement. No introduction. He simply walked toward Brielle's husband, Richard, said something quietly to him, and Richard, visibly surprised, nodded and gestured toward the microphone. There was a pause in the room. A shift. People leaned forward. Whispers started again. Who was this man? Evan took the mic and looked around with the calm of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, not in weddings but in boardrooms, in high-stakes meetings where silence was power. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth, grounded, and just loud enough to cut through the chatter. "I'm Evan. I'm Callie's husband. I know I missed the ceremony, and I'm truly sorry for that, but I was hoping to say a few words, not as a toast, but as a reminder." He looked at no one in particular, and yet somehow everyone. "I understand there's been some curiosity about the gifts today," he continued, his tone steady. "Especially one that didn't come wrapped in glossy ribbon or from a high-end registry. A gift that stood out perhaps not in the way people expected." Now the room was still. "I want to talk about that gift," Evan said, "because my wife spent 6 weeks making it, not ordering it, not buying it, making it." He glanced toward the gift table where, in the corner, I could just barely see the white-wrapped package buried beneath polished boxes. She didn't make it because she couldn't afford anything else. She made it because she remembered what this day was supposed to be, about connection, history, memory, family. He turned to look at me, and for the first time that entire day, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen, completely. The quilt she made carries stories only 2 sisters could understand. Fabric from their childhood bedroom curtains, a piece of prom dress, a scrap from their old camping tent. She gave her sister something that can't be returned, exchanged, or matched in value because its value isn't monetary. There were murmurs in the crowd now, people shifting, realigning. I saw Brielle's eyes widen. Her hand instinctively moved to her chest like something inside her cracked a little. Her friends, who just hours earlier mocked the package, were now looking around uncomfortably, realizing they'd missed something important. "And I get it," Evan added, softer now. "It's easy to miss the point when the lights are this bright, when appearances seem to matter more than substance, but I want you to know something." He pulled something from the inside pocket of his blazer, a single envelope. "This," he said, raising it slightly, "is our gift to the bride and groom." He nodded to the staff near the projection wall. The lights dimmed. Suddenly, an image appeared on the screen, an aerial view of a villa, Mediterranean style, oceanfront, lush gardens, arched windows. It looked like something out of a luxury magazine. "This is Villa Marisol," Evan said. "It's located on the southern coast of Spain. Brielle mentioned it once over Christmas how she dreamed of a place like it, with olive trees and a view of the sea." He turned toward her now. She was frozen in place, tears brimming. "The deed is in this envelope. It's yours free and clear. A home to build your life together. A reminder that love can be generous. But most importantly," he looked back at the room, "a reminder that the greatest gifts aren't wrapped in boxes. They're wrapped in memory, in humility, in time." You could hear a pin drop. Even Mrs. Whitmore, the diamond-clad mother-in-law, was pale and speechless. And for the first time all night, no one looked at my dress, or my table, or my gift. They looked at me. Really looked. And not one of them laughed. Brielle didn't move. The room may have erupted in applause, gasps, and whispers, but she stood there, stunned, eyes locked on the screen behind Evan. The Mediterranean villa shimmered in high definition, its sunlit windows and tiled roof seeming almost unreal against the soft lighting of the ballroom. For a second, she looked like the little girl I used to know, speechless, not because of status or spectacle, but because someone had seen her heart and responded to it with truth. No sparkle, no spin. Just sincerity. Evan stepped off the stage. He didn't linger for praise. He didn't pose for photos. He simply returned to our table, took my hand in his, and gave me a nod. But the room didn't move on. It couldn't. People started whispering louder now, not in mockery but in awe. Who is he? Did she say villa? Wait, what does he do? That last question hung in the air until it found its way to Richard the groom. He was still standing next to Brielle, champagne glass halfway to his lips, blinking like someone had just unplugged his reality. He turned to Evan, extending a shaky hand. I don't even know what to say, Richard stammered. Evan shook it calmly. No need, just take care of her, that's all I ask. And that's when Mrs. Whitmore finally approached. She looked smaller than she had all evening. Her posture wasn't as sharp. The weight of the diamonds on her neck suddenly looked less like status and more like armor. Mr. Walker, Evan said simply. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Evan Walker, as in Evergreen Solutions? He nodded once. A visible ripple of recognition passed through her expression, like a curtain pulled back all at once. Evergreen Solutions was everywhere. Tech, energy, clean water, AI development, billion-dollar contracts, White House consultations. Forbes had done a profile just last month on the mysterious founder who refused to be photographed. They had one grainy image of Evan in a flannel shirt beside a solar battery prototype in Montana. She realized in that moment that the man she had dismissed as a background husband was a quiet force behind some of the world's most forward-facing technology. You're that Evan Walker, she whispered. Sometimes, he replied with a half-smile. Mostly, I'm just Callie's husband. That shut her up. Lisa, maid of honor, made her way over too, suddenly overly friendly, eyes wide and voice sweetened. Callie, you should have told us who you really were. But I didn't reply. Because the truth was, I hadn't hidden anything. I'd just never thought I needed to explain who my husband was to justify my place in a room. And now, I didn't have to. The staff began repositioning the gift table. My quilt was no longer hidden behind glossy boxes. In fact, Brielle herself walked toward it and lifted the package gently. With trembling fingers, she began unwrapping it in front of everyone. There were no gasps this time. Just silence. A hush that wrapped around the ballroom like reverence. She unfolded the quilt slowly, holding it up so the guests could see the careful stitching, the layers of memory woven together. This is from our bedroom curtains, she said softly. And this is from the dress I wore to junior prom. Callie stayed home with me that night when my date bailed. I didn't even remember until now. Her voice cracked. One of the bridesmaids wiped away a tear. Even Mrs. Whitmore blinked hard. I stood frozen, unsure what to say. This wasn't what I expected. Not the reveal, not the villa, and certainly not the way my sister now looked at me, like someone waking up from a long sleep and seeing daylight for the first time. She walked toward me, quilt still in her arms. Callie, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I didn't speak right away. I just stepped forward and hugged her, the way I used to when we were kids, and she scraped her knee or had a bad dream. Her grip around me was desperate and real. And it was enough. Later, as the reception wound down, I stood on the terrace with Evan, watching guests mill around inside. People still shot glances our waysome, curious, others reverent. But no one looked at us like we didn't belong. Brielle came out alone, still holding the quilt. She stood beside us, her voice softer now. Why didn't you tell me who Evan really was? I smiled faintly. Would it have mattered? She looked down. Maybe, but not in the way it should have. I let the silence hang for a second, then said, You changed, Bri. Not just your address or your last name, but the way you see people. And I stopped knowing how to talk to you without feeling like I had to explain myself. Tears welled in her eyes again. I was embarrassed by your gift, she admitted, her voice shaking. Not because it wasn't expensive, but because it reminded me of everything I'd forgotten. You're not shallow, I said. You just let shallow people speak too loud. She looked at Evan. And you, she said, half laughing through her tears. You gave us a house. Evan smiled gently. That wasn't the real gift. What was? He looked at her, a reminder that love is quiet, and real wealth never needs to be announced. We didn't stay until the last dance. Evan and I slipped out quietly, leaving behind a ballroom still buzzing with questions, newfound respect, and the soft unraveling of old assumptions. Brielle hugged me one more time at the valet stand, her arm still wrapped around the quilt like it was a treasure map she'd just rediscovered. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for not giving up on me." I didn't say much, just smiled. There wasn't anything left to prove. As our car pulled away from the Holston estate, I watched the lights grow smaller in the rearview mirror. My dress still had a wrinkle in the hem, my heels still pinched my toes, but somehow I felt taller. "You okay?" Evan asked. I turned to him, studying his profile in the passing streetlights, calm, grounded, my anchor. "I am now," I said, "but was it really necessary? The house, the announcement?" He was quiet for a beat. Then he replied, "Probably not. But sometimes, Callie, when a lesson is long overdue, it has to be unforgettable." I nodded slowly, understanding what he meant. That night wasn't just about generosity, it was about restoring perspective. And not just for them, for me too. Because here's the truth I hadn't wanted to admit. Somewhere along the line, I'd started believing them. The looks, the silences, the subtle exclusion, all those things had wormed their way into my mind and convinced me that I was somehow less. That simplicity equaled smallness. That love had to shine to be seen. But not anymore. A few weeks later, a package arrived in the mail. It was a photo frame. Inside was a picture of the quilt, hanging on the wall of Brielle and Richard's new villa in Spain. Beneath it, a note in her handwriting. "We tell everyone this is the most valuable gift we received, because it's the only one that tells our story." I read it twice, then carefully hung the photo in my hallway, right next to a picture of me and Brielle catching fireflies as kids. The phone calls became more frequent after that. No more strained pleasantries or updates about gala events. Instead, she asked about my students. She remembered my birthday. She even visited our home, sitting on our sagging old couch like it was the coziest place on earth. "This feels like a home," she told me one evening, barefoot, sipping tea from a chipped mug. "Ours still feels like a showroom." I smiled. Give it time. Real life leaves marks, and that's what makes it beautiful. Even the Whitmores surprised me. Evan and I were invited to dinner, an obvious attempt to understand him better, but still, the tone was different, quieter, more curious than condescending. Over dessert, Mrs. Whitmore took me aside. "I judged you unfairly," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "And I've made a career out of judging. But Richard says, you're the person Brielle calls when she doesn't know what to do. That says more than any pedigree." I didn't gloat, I just nodded. Sisters are good for that. Richard changed too. He began consulting Evan on philanthropic work-starting scholarships for low-income youth and launching a mentorship program at his firm. I once caught him helping stack chairs at a charity event in sneakers and a hoodie, looking more human than I ever thought possible. Evan never talked much about what happened that night at the wedding. He didn't need to. But during one lazy Sunday afternoon in our backyard garden, I asked him, "Do you ever regret it? Living so simply when you could live like, well, like them?" He looked up from his book, resting it on his chest. "No," he said, "because I live exactly as rich as I want to be, and none of what matters to me is bought." A year after the wedding, Brielle announced she was pregnant. The news came during dinner at our parents' house, where we'd all gathered just like old times. There were no caterers, no chandeliers, just meatloaf, mismatched dishes, and laughter bouncing off the same walls that raised us. As congratulations poured in, Brielle reached for my hand. "Will you make a quilt for the baby?" she asked quietly. "Like the wedding one with family memories." I smiled. "I've already started." And in that moment, I felt the full weight of the journey we'd traveled, not just as sisters, but as women trying to find our place in a world that so often tells us we're not enough unless we're impressive. But I'd learned something. Sometimes, the most impressive thing you can do is to stay soft in a hard world. To give a piece of yourself when you know it might be mocked. To stand your ground without raising your voice. To let love be the loudest thing in the room even if it's wrapped in fabric and stitched by hand. My name is Callie, and if you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or unworthy in a place full of noise and glitter, know this: your worth isn't in what they say, it's in what you give quietly, intentionally, bravely. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can bring to the table is a quilt no one saw coming.